There's this tragic sailor who's marooned, shipwrecked on a desert island for like 20 years. And finally the flight patterns change and some pilots spot these gatherings on this island that shouldn't have anybody on it. So they go for a rescue, and of course, though, Netflix wants the documentary. So they arrive, they have a big celebration, they check and make sure he's okay. And then they say, hey, look, we're happy to rescue you, but also here's a fat contract if you want to, do a documentary about how you survived. So he happily obliges. He shows them through all the trails on the island, the game trails. He shows the freshwater sources. And they come to this beautiful clearing in the middle of the island. It's up against like a rock face. And there's three structures there. And he sort of dives right in. He says, look, this is the first building is my church. I came to the island already a religious man. But it was certainly a sign from God that I survived, and so I sort of redevoted myself. I spent a lot of time in my church feeling close to God and practicing my faith. The second one, he says, look, here's my house. Once I realized that help wasn't coming, I really tried to build a life for myself. So he's really proud of it. He shows them he's dug it into the ground so it regulates temperature. He's got kind of like makeshift running water, some bamboo piping out of the jungle. Really proud of it. And he's like, so anyway, I appreciate, the rescue. Thank you, Netflix. Thank you, everybody. Let's go. I'm ready to go home. And they're like, what do you mean? What about this third building? And he's like, I don't want to talk about that. It was from like the early days of the island. Pretty dark times, honestly. Kind of traumatic. I don't really want to relive it. Thank you. So yeah, no, thanks, but let's just move on. And they're like, yeah, come on, tell us. And he's like, I don't really want to talk about it. They're like, you got to tell us. And he's like, look, I really don't want to talk about it. And they're like, it was in your contract. You have to tell us. And so he finally was like, oh. He's like, okay. What is it? That's the church I used to go to. And so, we can take the critique. Sure, wherever we go, there we are. Wherever we go, we're gonna bring our own baggage, even if we're the only one on the island. But in many ways, Christianity is the church that we used to go to. And it's not enough to have a newer, healthier church for a lot of us. And now even we look at the world, and maybe the only way to survive is actually by leaving the island all together. Good morning. I'm Reverend Ben Collins, friends from Mosaic. It's so good to be with you. You all have been a spiritual home for me for years, a circle of people who refuse to give up on love, on each other, on the possibility that communities can heal what doctrines seem to harm over and over. Many of us became universalist or found our way here because we experienced a version of Christianity that confused certainty with truth, confused purity with goodness, control with care. And so we watched faith get co-opted for power. And we've watched neighbors and loved ones get pushed out of the circle. And yet, even for many of us, when we left the institutions deconstructed, the longing remained for meaning, for belonging, for lives that bend towards compassion and justice. I want to remind us of the title today and then share sort of a subtitle as a way to kind of frame this morning. You'll see the title behind me, Jesus After Christianity. I just kind of scrawled it there for us as a reminder. And I took liberties with the subtitle. It's 2 lines. So dysfunctional faith is about purity and belief. Functional faith is about practice and belonging. I'll say it again. Dysfunctional faith is about purity and belief. Functional faith is about practice and belonging. About 25 years ago, fresh off of a late high school conversion in an evangelical church, I walked into my first religious studies class at Stetson, Intro to Christianity with our mutual friend, Dr. Don Musser. May the God of friendship hold Don in their embrace. I didn't know Don was about to become, a mentor, but more importantly, was about to take my young, brittle version of faith and just absolutely dismantle it and replace it with something much better, a curiosity, a hunger to understand, a path to actually practice the way of Jesus. I didn't know he was going to become my mentor for 2 decades. I didn't know that he'd be sitting beside me when I gave my valedictorian address, a speech that was shaped by a book that he handed me on day 1, Jesus Before Christianity. I know I'm covering that. Albert Nolan, Jesus Before Christianity. And this is the one he gave me. You can see on the top corner, it says 25th anniversary edition. And that came out in 2001. That class, that book, that mentor started my deconstruction. And if you're playing along at home, yes, that means my deconstruction started before my vocational ministry and has now continued after it. In that season with Don, with that book, I met the historical Jesus for the first time. I actually read the Gospels for the first time. I wrestled with the kingdom of God and its demands on society and on me. And along the way, I let go, and if you have your Unitarian bingo card at home, you can play along. I let go of predestination. I let go of biblical literalism. I let go of supernatural theism. I let go of white Christian nationalism and the power structures that needed those things to prop up their survival. That same curiosity has become this sermon and a larger project that I'm excited to share with you this morning. But the sermon first. Nolan asks us to meet Jesus before the creeds and the culture wars, locating him among the poor under Roman occupation. Nolan spotlights what Jesus did. More than these abstract beliefs that have become associated with Christianity, Jesus healed, he fed, he included, he confronted, he told the truth, and he risked over and over again for love. Nolan's big idea in the book is that if you start with the lived life of Jesus, you actually end up with a very concrete spirituality, one that you can test in struggling families and in real neighborhoods and in movements and communities. So this morning, we're going to follow this sort of Nolan's simple path from context to actions, and then kind of ask what are the implications for our lives, for our families, maybe for our cities. The book that Don handed me had an urgency 25 years ago when it was put in my hands, and when you read the introduction, it had an urgency 50 years ago when it was written. And I think it has that same urgency today, which was just part of why this sermon and this project. Nolan says, and I'm going to borrow this, Nolan says this book, and I'll add this next year, 2026, has an urgent and practical purpose. I'm concerned, he says, about people, the daily sufferings of so many millions of people, and the prospect of much greater suffering in the near future. My purpose is to find out what can be done about it. Jesus After Christianity is my attempt to name a way forward for people who still are moved by the Jesus story and the promises that they were given about what that meant, but are done with the dysfunction. People who know deep down, intuitively, at a level that we would call spiritual if it didn't make us so dang uncomfortable. People who know what Jesus is about, and they're not seeing it reflected in Christianity. And I think the folks that have made up Mosaic and have welcomed my voice and have loved me so well for so long are exactly the kind of people among whom this could come alive. And so I love sharing it. The world is in serious trouble. Christianity doesn't seem to be helping, but maybe Jesus can. I mean, what if Christianity is actually the biggest threat to Jesus, to the ongoing practice of the way of Jesus? What if the institution that owns the brand and has all the money and all the power has actually come to look very little like the Jesus it claims to worship, and whose name it oppresses and shames and excludes? That's why I'm asking, what about a version of Jesus after Christianity? Not that's anti-church, but that's pro-person again. A guide for participating in the way of Jesus in a world that's been complicated by dysfunctional Christianity. Obsessed with belief and purity and nationalism and wealth. We're here looking for the way of Jesus. We're looking for a way out of that Christianity. We're looking for Jesus after Christianity. I mean, I can't be alone. Has it felt to anyone else here recently like the world may be coming to an end and that somehow Christianity isn't saving the day, but is actually the evil genius behind the curtain, or is at least in the boardroom counting their money? For too long, Christianity, especially in its evangelical forms, and I'd say most heinously in the elections of Donald Trump, has been shaped by purity codes and belief systems that prioritize exclusion, that justified oppression, that pretended certainty, that lusted for control. And in the wake of that political co-option and institutional decline and widespread deconstruction, many of us have left the church, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir with the Unitarians, but we haven't lost our longing for meaning, for love, for the hope, the things that are talked about and promised and that we're invited into when we actually read the story of Jesus and hear the life of Jesus. Jesus after Christianity begins where much of the religious world left off, with people who still hunger for spiritual depth, but are done with religious oppression and rigid dogma and dysfunctional faith. And so no matter where you start with Jesus or Christianity, and no matter where you land, here's what's in it for you, okay? A better understanding of Jesus and a better way to solve your problems, right? That's a pretty great promise and a pretty low bar. Right? You can disagree with everything I say, and you'll end up here with a better understanding of Jesus and a better way to solve your problems. So, and again, not Jesus as a singular solution to all the problems. That's what's been the last couple thousand years of confessional religion. But instead, Jesus as a framework through which we're invited to run all of our problems. Not that it'll solve all of our problems, right? We don't believe in that genie stuff anymore. But by running our problems through Jesus as a framework, it increases the likelihood that we'll solve that problem in ways that are, you ready for it? Empathetic, kind, compassionate, just, merciful, rather than, you guessed it, afraid and angry and self-righteous and violent. The bet of this, right? The bet of Jesus after Christianity is that if we run our hardest problems through Jesus' framework of empathy, justice, and mercy, we won't magically fix everything. But our responses will come out more humane, more healing, more courageous. Let me say it again, really simple for those in the back. Jesus is a framework through which we're invited to run our problems, not because it'll solve them, but because it will change how we solve them. Let me say that again. Jesus is a framework through which we're invited to run our problems, not because it will solve them, but because it may change how we solve them. And if I'm being honest, I think that's what the world needs right now, right? I don't think we need Jesus, the hero, to swoop in on a blazing sheep and solve all our problems, right? I think we need Jesus, the humble guide, who can show us better ways to solve our own problems. I think that's what Jesus offers. I pray that's the way of Jesus after Christianity. If you're hearing my dog barking in the background, sorry, that's Buddy. Maybe you aren't. We're living in a tense season, aren't we? Politically, socially, spiritually. The loudest religious voices in our nation have too often baptized cruelty, traded curiosity for conspiracy, and confused partisanship for moral courage. Policies that target vulnerable people are marketed as family values, and dehumanizing language normalizes violence both ways. I mean, as I record this week, we've had a stabbing, a school shooting, and a right-wing pundit assassinated on the same day. Many of us, we carry the ache of families split apart over ideologies that claim God, but look nothing like love. So what do we do? What do we do? I mean, here's the question. If we do nothing, won't that harden our hearts? If we do nothing, won't it just cause us to turn away, to live in denial? Are we courageous enough to explore an alternative, maybe even a couple? I mean, could we maybe return to a way that is both very old and somehow new? Could we look just for a minute at the lived life of Jesus, not a system of belief, not a purity code, not a membership test, but a practice that heals, welcomes, liberates? Let me just scoot through really quick 5 lived practices from the life of Jesus before Christianity. Again, based on Albert Nolan's book, Jesus Before Christianity, my upcoming work, Jesus After Christianity, this sermon. And we'll land with some concrete commitments for this political season, kind of a bridge to this larger upcoming project, and a path for pairing content with real communal experiences. So here we go. 5 lived practices from the life of Jesus. For whatever reason in my mind, this is like I have the voice of Letterman from the classic late 90s top 10 countdown. So that's how we're going to do it. The top 5 things Jesus did before Christianity. Okay, number 1, the open table, right? Radical belonging over boundary keeping. In the stories, Jesus keeps pulling more chairs to the table, right? Fishermen and the families that have to support them, tax collectors, the devout and the doubters, women and children who are usually told to keep their mouths shut, the poor, the sick, the ritually unclean. Jesus eats with them. That's not just dinner, that's social defiance. It says you belong before you match up with any behavior or ideology. You're welcome before you know the secret password, right? In fact, there is no password. And so in practice, we live in a world obsessed with sorting. We practice at our best, we practice unsorted belonging. We don't ask people to pass an ideological test, entrance exam to be loved. We build real tables, meals, and circles and groups where neighbors meet across differences and discover one another's dignity. My son Huck, crazy, started middle school here recently, a few weeks in, and he came home sad the other day and he said, we can't sit with anyone we want anymore at lunch. Now we have assigned seats. And I thought, man, what an interesting metaphor both ways, right? Like the radical table fellowship of unsorted belonging begins with a willingness to abandon the seats that our cultures and our religions and our power systems have assigned to us. But it also means looking at ourselves and acknowledging that if we get to choose, there are also probably people with whom we'd rather not dine. And the radical table fellowship of Jesus opens a table to all. So the top 5 things Jesus did before Christianity. Number 1, the open table. Number 2, touching the untouchable. This is restoring dignity, right? This is not practicing or policing purity. Again and again, Jesus touches those who are deemed untouchable. Lepers, hemorrhaging women, the grieving, the possessed by illness and despair. He doesn't ask, what did you do, right? Why are you getting punished? He's not asking, what rule did you break? He asks, what do you need? What do you need? The healing is physical, yes, but it's also social. People are restored to community. Right? And in practice, we have to move towards pain. We have to align with those harmed by policies and by prejudices. And we have to prioritize material care, rent relief, rides, meals, accompaniment, because dignity isn't a theory, right? It has to be felt in people's bodies and in their schedules and in their bank accounts. My wife, Jo, she attended this yoga retreat recently, and one of the sessions was entirely on practicing the listening posture of being the mountain. One person speaks, the other is the mountain. They receive what is said, but they have no mouth, so they cannot speak, but they have only to listen. I mean, isn't that a powerful practice that Jesus engages here, asking someone what they need? What might happen if we genuinely asked people what they needed and we were unable to respond? And we could only listen to their sensed and articulated sense of need. So top 5 things Jesus did before Christianity. Open table. Number 2, touch the untouchable. Number 3, parables that flip the script. This is imagination as moral power. So Jesus teaches in stories that subvert the norm. Samaritans are heroes, day laborers who are paid enough to live, a living wage, get out of here. Tiny seeds that turn into these shelters for everyone. Parables retrain our imagination. They show us a world that is and as it could be. And we've got to do this. We've got to continue to cultivate moral imagination. We've got to tell better stories than our fear does. right? We have to ask things like, what would our city look like if we measured success based on how the most vulnerable are cared for, right? How those neighbors are doing. And then we would pilot small local experiments that start to make these stories true, and share their hope with other people. Whether we leave, to bring it back to the island where we started, whether we leave the first church, on the island and we join a new church, whether we leave the church altogether, right, and stay on the island, or whether we leave the island altogether, this story creates a world of moral imagination in which we can explore choices, consequences, character, virtue. We can find ourselves in what's funny and uncomfortable precisely because it's true, right? That's why we nod along in recovery meetings and we laugh at stand-up comedy. Without demanding religious practice, parables, they elicit in us confession. And testimony, where we say, this is true about me, that's confession. And then testimony, this is true about the world or about God or ultimate reality, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so Jesus before Christianity had an open table, touched the untouchable, used parables to flip the script with moral imagination. Number 4, nonviolent courage. Jesus confronted power without dehumanizing people, right? Jesus walks into these centers of power with courage. Right? He looks at hypocrisy and he names it. He disrupts exploitation. He refuses to mirror the violence that he resists. He chooses the way of the cross, not because suffering is good or fun, right? Or just like noble, let's be martyrs, but because refusing to become what you oppose is the only path that turns enemies into neighbors. You got to hear me this week, right? After what's happened. Refusing to become what you oppose is the only path that turns enemies into neighbors. And so we've got to train in nonviolent communication and action. We've got to refuse to hold persons of any kind in contempt. We've got to set boundaries without hate. We've got to show up at school boards and city halls with fierce gentleness. Telling the truth without surrendering to the tactics of dehumanizing people. If you were with us yesterday, thank you for the folks that were downtown for the protests, the No Kings protests. I know some of you all have been there for a while. We've got a little community that joined you, I think. And number 5, things that Jesus did before Christianity, the beloved community, small cells of practice, not spectacular religion. Right? What the stories say is that Jesus sent people out 2 by 2. He formed these little circles that shared resources and cared for the sick and helped forgive debts and broke bread. The movement grows not by celebrity, but by cells, small communities that practice love in public. We organize small, consistent circles that do 3 things on repeat: eat, learn, and act. Not once, but rhythmically, and not perfectly, but persistently. Despite the strong conviction of many Unitarians that I am in fact Unitarian, I do still hold my ordination in the United Methodist Church. And that's Methodism, that's kind of their thing, right? Wesley was big on the idea that renewal wouldn't come through the mainline Anglican thing, right? It wasn't going to come out of the pulpit's power, the power's pulpit. For him, it wouldn't be the megachurch, right? Modern evangelical Christianity. He took a countercultural approach of small groups and clear community with accountability. Right? What social science and research would come to call shared attention and shared action, right? And this is not checking boxes, it's practicing a different politics. It's the politics of the open table, the healing touch, the courageous truth, the imaginative story, and beloved community, because it's just ideas, right? It's just another ideology if it's not practiced in the real world. But the hope is this: in the face of what's a scary world today, we know that a committed minority can become a cultural cascade. But what if that critical mass can't come from individuals listening to this external manufactured noise designed for palatability and profitability, but instead, what if the critical mass can only come from individuals who are listening within? My grandfather, on his deathbed, Conrad Sr., this was sort of the tail end of a long hospice residency for me. He and I had done some really good work talking about his upcoming death. And near the end, he leaned up and he sort of put his hand in my chest and he said, "Listen inside." And I spent a lot of time with that, thinking through that. And then we went and cleaned out his little apartment, and in the junk drawer was this plaque, this little placard that says, Conrad Collins, listen. And I was telling this story the other night to a group of people that I'm sharing this project and this sermon and this work with. And my dad was there, and he raised his hand and he said, that sat on the dashboard of my dad's car for like 25 years, right? Listen, and listen inside. So what would it look like and feel like to empower people to listen inside? This is Jesus After Christianity. And it's content that aims to separate and simplify the life and the practice of Jesus from the dysfunction of Christianity. In this question about empowering people to listen within, this for me comes together in a project that I'm going to be running in 2026 that I would love you all to be a part of, called the Listening Year. Year, like the calendar, year, not ear, like that one. The Listening Year is a 1-year experiment in sacred attention, community, and moral courage. The Listening Year is a 12-month spiritual and cultural project designed for people who are done with organized religion, but not done with the soul. It blends soulful gatherings, creative storytelling, and spiritual practices in a way that's fresh and inclusive, rooted in the life of Jesus beyond the boundaries of institutional Christianity. And I know, you're thinking, but what is it? What is it? What is it actually? It's 52 weekly gatherings called The Listening Room, low-lit, music-infused gathering right in downtown DeLand, some soul as the backdrop for some shared conversation, reflection, a brief and engaging teaching on this kind of content, Jesus After Christianity. Think Table Church meets Tiny Desk. So 52 weekly gatherings, 24 episodes of the Jesus After Christianity podcast. You've got a pretty good idea what that's going to be about based on Nolan's book. And then 12 monthly events, including practice retreats, feast events with meal and meaning, and prophets of comedy to help us laugh through the apocalypse. For me, the next year is giving people the life and the teachings of the historical Jesus. And then rather than inviting them to look outside to the tradition, to Christianity, to wealth and power, who have always had the microphone, we're going to give them the life and teachings of Jesus and assume nothing else. Not faith, not Christianity, not power. And we're going to invite people in that context to listen inside. In opinion dynamics research, a small committed minority can tip this larger group, somewhere between 10 and 25% of a population. When they come to hold an unshakable belief and they keep advocating it, that belief can spread rapidly to the majority. And that threshold isn't magic, right? It's not a universal number. It depends on context, how connected people are, how committed they are. Do they share attention and moral imagination? Does that lead to moral courage and action? The Listening Year is designed to become this committed minority project, right? To pair beautiful, concise content with public, repeatable practices so that a relatively small network can trigger some really visible cultural shift that we can feel and that our neighbors who need it can feel. Great content without community can become just another scroll, right? In the endless scroll. Organizing without stories can really feel thin and joyless. We want to build regular rhythms of listening and practice. Shared attention followed by shared action, moral imagination followed by moral courage. This is all still in the relatively early stages, but it's taking on a pretty significant momentum of its own. The easiest way for you to get involved at this point is to go to JesusAfterChristianity.com, just like it sounds, and sign up for the email. There will be some vision events in the fall, and then everything is going to kick off proper January 2026. That's JesusAfterChristianity.com. So you can participate. You can be the 10%. You can come hang out with us and help us try to tip the culture. And if you want to be more involved in that, I will share that we've already applied for a number of grants from folks that are studying this kind of thing, interested in creating this kind of thing. But I am looking for funding partners and collaborators. The publisher, actually, of this book, the original book, Orbis, they're coming on board to partner for the podcast. We're talking about an audiobook. Eventually, maybe I'll pitch a Jesus After Christianity book to them. Stetson is coming on board. The religion department has some exciting stuff in their catalog in 2026 that really matches this historical Jesus in the face of fascism, we'll call it. And if Mosaic would be open to a funding proposal, I would love to submit one. If Mosaic would like to partner in pulling off some of this stuff in the coming year, that would bring me such deep joy. Jesus After Christianity, the listening year. Let's remind ourselves why. Thanks for hanging with me. Is it possible that the reason the U.S. is imploding right now is because the people who get rich and powerful by selling Christianity have just gotten so good at selling Christianity to people who are desperate to buy Christianity? That no one's really paying attention to the way Jesus invited us to live. I mean, white Christian nationalism, which I think if we're being honest, capitalism, is a hell of a drug. It's a hell of a drug. What a shock if the way of Jesus was the Narcan that saved humanity from the lethal opioid called Christianity. What a shock if the way of Jesus was the Narcan that saved humanity from the lethal opioid called Christianity. Receive now, my friends, the benediction. I love you, Mosaic. Thank you for your time, for your sacred attention. May we go from this place full of the hope that we can still find Jesus-favored solutions. I'm going to go again. May we go from this place full of the hope that we can still find Jesus-flavored solutions to the bad taste left in our mouths by the evil that Christianity has created and blessed. May we go from this place committed to the open table, to the healing touch, to the brave story, to nonviolent courage, and the beloved community. And may the love we practice become the politics our neighbors can feel. I love you all. Peace be with you. Amen.